Find a new way to live in Toronto's coveted Forest Hill neighborhood. Foray by Canderel blends thoughtful, livable suite design with refined finishes and more than 50,000 square feet of amenities, including wellness spaces, work-from-home areas, fitness facilities, and places to unwind. A modern, elevated community crafted for the life you've earned. Your next home starts from $599,000. Learn more at live@foray.ca. That's live at FORET.ca.
So without further ado, we are thrilled and excited and honored to welcome the Challah Mom.
The Challah Mom, Anat Ishai, made her entrance into the synagogue banquet hall, dancing her way up towards the stage. She wore one of her trademark sparkly headscarves and a long burgundy sparkly dress. And suddenly, 200 Jewish women at Toronto's Shaarei Tefillah synagogue are on their feet, clapping and dancing with her to the sounds of Israeli pop music. At one point, Ishai pulled out a giant Israeli flag, and the crowd lifted it over their heads like a canopy. The room is a cross-section of Jewish Toronto. Some women wore jeans and sweatshirts, others in wigs, hats, and long dresses. Then the dancing gave way to the baking, her secret challah recipe.
And I want you to find a measuring cup on your table that you're going to share. And you have a half.
We pause while my dough and everybody else's rises, and she tells her story.
I explain to people you're from Toronto when you don't pronounce the second T. So everyone's like, where are you from? Toronto. Toronto? No, Toronto. Toronto.
Ishai invented her public persona in her Thornhill kitchen during the COVID lockdowns. At the time, she says she was overwhelmed, isolated, and struggling emotionally while at home with 4 children, so challah baking became the only ritual that grounded her week. Posting her baking videos online soon transformed her into the Challah Mom. Today, living in Israel with her husband and 4 children, Ishai has become part influencer, part Jewish educator, part motivational speaker. With an online following she's built of more than 300,000 people, including across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And while many Israelis looked for exits after the October 7th Hamas attacks, Ishai says the violence pushed her towards staying, not by posting graphic trauma online, but by doubling down on Israeli pride, Jewish joy, faith, and women gathering together around ritual and tradition.
It can feel like that war is actually happening in your home, somewhere else in another part of the world, even though it is not. And I decided that I never want to be part of the problem of what led the Jewish people to where we are today, but I want to be part of the solution.
I'm Ellin Bessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Friday, May 15th, 2026. Welcome to North Star, the flagship podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin's Charitable Foundation. The scene in Toronto this week would soon repeat itself in Vancouver on Wednesday and Winnipeg Thursday. Altogether, about 1,000 women came to her Canadian events, with hundreds more attending appearances in the U.S. ahead of Shavuot, the Jewish holiday that also marks the ancient grain harvest. Born in Israel to Russian immigrant parents, Ishai's family fled the First Intifada and moved to Canada. She was still a toddler and spoke no English. She attended public school and York University's business program, and her career path included work with Ontario's government and later Toronto's Jewish community institutions. Eventually, she found herself reconnecting to Orthodox Jewish life through the Thornhill Woods synagogue community. And after spending most of her life in this country, she moved back to Israel because it began to feel inevitable. Now, she's touring North America at a time when these large-scale challah baking gatherings among Jewish women have exploded since October 7th.
Let's go.
And the emotional high point of the evening comes when Ishai prepares her own giant batch of dough using 5 pounds of flour, the traditional quantity required to perform the mitzvah known as hafrashat challah.
Is challah. Ladies, keep your hands up in the air.
Separating a small piece of raw dough originally was supposed to go to temple priests in Jerusalem, and today many women mark the moment with a blessing and private prayers for healing, family, fertility. safety or someone in need, including soldiers in the IDF and some from her own family.
Now, it's been intense. It's been emotional. It's been deep. It's been raw.
I caught up with the Challah Mom after her Toronto appearance. Here's our conversation. Welcome to the Canadian Jewish News' North Star podcast, the Challah Mom. I was speaking to you on tour now in Vancouver as you're doing your Cross North America tour. It's good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Thank you for having me.
What was your first attempts at making challah? When did you learn to do this in your life before Challah Mom?
Yeah. So my husband loves to tell this story when people come to our Shabbat table, because when we first got married, I had a whole bunch of cookbooks that were given to me, and I attempted to make challah. Now, my husband, being the incredible man that he really is, he ate that very first challah, and he would describe it as a hard rock. If you would have used it to throw against a window, it would have shattered. And thank God none of his teeth shattered in the process of eating that challah, but he too says that I have come a very long way.
And I have to ask, does it qualify if you have raisins and sweet sugar on the top? Because some people like plain, and many people, especially our family, where the raisin is that part of your repertoire?
Well, I personally don't like raisins in my challah, but my grandmother does. It doesn't matter what you add into the challah. Challah's challah. The basics are the basics, and the toppings is really a reflection of one's personality and taste buds. So whatever floats your boat, go for it.
And can it qualify? And I don't mean it in a strict, weights and measures, but when you make the dough, for example, I personally made it for many years with the dough machine, a bread machine for the dough. Then and some people use mixers with a bread hook. Is that all part of your teachings, and you're okay with all the mechanical stuff, or does it have to be by hand to really get it?
So look, when it comes to making challah, of course it's permissible to use any of the electronics that are available to us in this modern day world, but there is something very beautiful about specifically making challah and the biblically prescribed amount of hafrashat challah, which is the 5 pounds, and doing that with your hands. Because if you really participate in the ritual of making challah and you set your intention, as I mentioned in all of my challah bakes, who are you making this challah for? There is something very beautiful about connecting your mind, body, and soul to the experience and using your hands in the process. But like, if I'm in a rush and then we're just making 3 challahs for Shabbat, then I'll take out my mixer and give it a go.
What can we tell our audience who may not be as observant or not know more about the background of this mitzvah that you just mentioned, hafrashat challah?
Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. I first want to say that challah in general is the most non-threatening mitzvah, I feel, that's available to Jewish women. Why? Because unless you have IBS or Crohn's, everyone loves some gluten. And I have this feeling that I've always felt that if you could sit with someone and break bread, you can bridge peace. And that's why I've always gravitated towards challah myself. Now, when it comes to hafrashat challah, there used to be a time when a temple stood in Jerusalem. And over 2,200 years ago, that temple, the second temple, was destroyed by the Romans. When that temple did stand, we had Kohanim Gadol, which are the priests, and they had a specific job, and they were to take care of the temple duties. So while all the bakers of the land, men, women, or children, were preparing for Shabbat, each one of them would take a little bit of their challah dough and make sure that their Kohanim, their priests in their particular villages in Jerusalem and in the outskirts, would have enough bread for challah, because those priests were taking care of their temple duties for the rest of everyone else, in the region. Because the temple doesn't stand in Jerusalem today, we continue with this tradition over 2,000 years later, and we take a little piece of the challah dough from this 5 pounds, that's the biblically prescribed amount, and we raise it and acknowledge that not everything that we have in this world and not everything that is given to us is actually for us. You can relate it back even to the mitzvah of tzedakah, the notion that 10% of your earnings should be given to charity. The same idea, you've been given all these blessings, you've been given all these tools, but not everything that's given to you is meant for you. Some of it is meant to be given away. And so I really love connecting that to a bigger picture of sharing challah, not just for you. Make one, give one to a neighbor. Make one, invite people over to share it with. Challah is not something that you just consume alone. Challah is a communal opportunity to share it, not just in bread, but to share in celebration and to share in conversation and to share in the tradition of and what it means to be Jewish.
You mentioned earlier that you had a theme for this tour about choosing when I attended the event. People came up and made prayers for lone soldiers or for people who are having health challenges or other challenges in their lives. I wanted to explore that. Is that part of the biblical, or is that your additional, journey and how you help people through your events?
Yeah, so our sages teach us that every mitzvah blasts a little bit more light in this world. And when you do mitzvahs as Jewish people, nothing is random. Everything is very intentional, specifically Jewish women. And so when we take on the mitzvah, and specifically with challah, there's a moment in time when women understand we are tasked with taking a lot of these random ingredients in life called children, challenges, family dynamics, political, economic, socioeconomic conditions, and it all sort of hits us in the home. And we're the ones that are the pillars of the family. And there's this opportunity where we're not just taking bread, but we're talking to God. We're asking, we're pleading, we're praying. We're trying to connect to something bigger than ourselves. Challah is a metaphor for life. You're taking something physical and you're elevating it to the spiritual. In that moment is a really beautiful opportunity for asking for anything, really. I've witnessed myself, and we saw even after October 7th, one of the mothers of a hostage who was taking hafrashat challah, and moments later she got a phone call that her daughter was going to be returned to her that evening. I wouldn't even say it or believe it until I saw it. I don't know why things work the way they do, but I know that if they work, then I want to tap into that. So whether someone is an observant Jew or a connected Jew or a spiritual Jew or not, I think we can all get with the program that when we need some help, we'll do anything, and we'll find any avenue, and a non-threatening avenue like challah seems to be the right road for many of us.
After October 7th, challah making events exploded in the diaspora here in Canada. So many women-centered events about challah. Why do you think that happened?
I think, first of all, it's been taught to us that the three main mitzvot that are centered for women are lighting Shabbat candles, challah, and taharat mishpacha, which are family purity laws. So family purity laws is something that's not really touched too much because, that is a more private mitzvah. Lighting Shabbat candles is something that happens more in solitude, and you have to be present at the right time to do it as well on a Friday night. But challah, you can make any time of day. You can make with anyone. And more importantly, when you do it communally, you're learning not only a trade, an art, a mastery, but you're also connecting in the ritual. And you can talk about anything when it comes to bread. Get women in the room and say, let's make some bread, some gluten. You can take it home. And in the meantime, while they're in the room, you can inspire them and empower them and talk about anything. It's a beautiful way to get Jewish women connected. I wasn't surprised after October 7th that challah bakes became more pronounced. And I was so thrilled actually to see that it kind of got revived, because there was a moment in time that many of us were, maybe not all of us, but certainly as a Jewish people, we may have become a little bit more relaxed in our Jewish tradition. So I was pleased to see the uptake.
I want to pivot a little bit back to tradition and your own personal story of growing up. It was, many people may not know that you're a Toronto-raised girl with Israeli heritage and Russian heritage. And how did you identify as a Jewish person when you were growing up here in Toronto when you started at the age of 4?
Yeah, so I didn't speak English until I was about 8 years old. I came to Canada just before I turned 5. I attended Rockford Public School in kindergarten. I did not speak any English. Then I went to Charles H. Best on Wilmington. I grew up in a home where 3 languages were spoken in one sentence. I never really could connect to my friends who identified themselves as Canadian Jews or Jewish Canadians. I would always say, I live in Canada, but my background is Russian Israeli. I was raised in predominantly Ashkenazi community, very few Jewish students in my class, but I grew up with a very strong Jewish identity. And I very much understood I was born in Israel and that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. And Israel is home, and we are guests in Canada, and we are very comfortable guests in Canada. And in Canada, you can succeed and you can live and breathe and dream and become the vision of what Canada was offering. And I did do that. And Canada did provide for myself and my family everything that is said it would. So it is the only home I've ever known. It is the city that raised me. It is the community that supported me. And it is a place that I'll always look back with very favorable and warm eyes. It wasn't until I was 14, almost 15 years old, that actually NCSY came into my life. And I think that's the beginning of the story where I understood I have a huge gap in my Jewish education, and I lacked a lot of information about what it means to be a Jew.
Well, when you went to Israel with NCSY, what changed you on that trip emotionally?
I think there is something that will resonate with a lot of your listeners and your viewers. When you first come to Israel, if you've never been, whether you're born there and forgot and like me and went back, or you've never been there and went for the very first time, there is this magnetic field that surrounds you. It's a feeling that's indescribable, but the best way to describe it is home. And later in life, I learned that perhaps I am a reincarnated soul, and perhaps this old soul that I always thought I was is because I've been around the block a couple times and I've come back to complete a mission, perhaps, in this world, in this life. But I just felt very connected to home. And that sort of started a journey of wanting to understand and give a foundation to this very strong Jewish identity that I always had.
Coming up, how she copes with online hate after October 7th, and not just from outside the Jewish community. We're talking about your Canadian life. When you started your online life, which was your branding and your lifestyle and Challah Mom, it was in the middle of COVID. You've shared that story beautifully. Did you feel pushed into doing this, or did it happen naturally?
I've always been a bit of a performer, I would say. I've always been on the stage and never shied away from the lights. And so I do remember that when I first started posting some pictures about Challah, because I knew that if I'm going to have some sort of presence online, I wasn't going to share my family or be very vulnerable or cross boundaries or show private life in a way that made me uncomfortable, because the internet is a scary place too. So I decided I'm just going to post about Challah as really a resistance to the sourdough movement, because I couldn't get the starter going. But it was one of those things where just the challah turned out really beautifully, because I was really just trying to regulate myself. That challah needed to come out great for my mental health. And I really focused on it. And I wasn't doing it in a spiritual way. I was doing it in a very I'm focused on this. If I could just focus on this one task and do it well, maybe today would be a good day. And mind you, again, this is in the height of COVID. It was a very dark time. So I remember this was the one thing that just had to go well. And when it did go well, and I started to play music in the kitchen again, and I started to come out of that darkness a little bit, is when I did change my handle from my name to Challah Mom, because I felt that Challah I wanted to express, and I'm a mom. And that's a really big part of my identity.
You're in Israel now, and it's after October 7th. You got there like a month before.
Correct.
So how did you put the two together in your socials?
For you viewers that don't know, my husband and I did come to Israel on a one-year family adventure the year before. And we were there in the height of all the protests that were happening, and in the height of terrorist attacks that were occurring, and in the height of a lot of rockets that were being launched into Sderot. And I knew all of that was happening in the background, and I chose not to show any of it or speak of it on my platform. And the reason why is not because I personally did not know that it was happening. I absolutely knew all of this was happening, but I decided to make a conscious decision that if there is a war raging out there in the world, there must be no war raging in my home. There must be no war raging inside of me. Because sometimes when one person is experiencing a war, a personal hell, and they share that with the world in through their own private channels, because it can feel like that war is actually happening in your homes. I decided that I never want to be part of the problem of what led the Jewish people to where we are today, but I want to be part of the solution. So it's not that I'm ignorant or not knowledgeable or don't care or are not living through the trying times that we are in, but I choose to respond with strength and with love and with connection. It's a human thing that I'm not perfect. I get angry and I get sad and I get scared and I speak about all those things on social media, but I'm not going to go on social media with crocodile tears, and I'm not going to traumatize you by letting you hear sirens or show you difficult things that only trained professionals know how to deal with. I've chosen a different way, and in that way, I think I've been able to capture a broader audience of Jewish women, and that's the most important thing to me. Jewish women. I don't care about your Jewish background. I care that you're a Jewish woman, and for whatever reason, you still want to connect. That's why I continue to do what I do.
You mentioned about living through it, and you have a personal stake by being in Israel that you made Aliyah, but you also have kids that are now following in the footsteps of all the Israeli soldiers who've made Aliyah. What do you want to share about how you are living through that?
So I want to share that I grew up in a home that, for very valid reasons, would dress rehearse disaster. Anyone who grew up in the shadow of Holocaust survivors or Eastern European pogroms, or the challenges of being a Jew that was viewed as a second-class citizen anywhere else, I understand why there's a lot of trauma in Jewish homes. So I grew up in the shadow of that, but I've worked really hard not to dress rehearse disaster, meaning I understand, I'm very clear about the risks that my children will be taking in the future to be the guardians and protectors and warriors of Eretz Israel for the Jewish people inside of Israel and outside of Israel. I also want to say that in doing so, I'm nurtured and protected and guided by an incredible army of Jewish mothers who have been there, done that. And I know where to place my anxiety and concerns and my questions. I'm a person that doesn't use my family as accessories to my branding. They are a very important part of my life, a treasured part of my life, a part of my life that I protect and nurture privately. I don't represent all Jewish women. I represent, I believe, I hope, a mirror, a reflection of what is the best part about being a Jewish woman. But my way of living and choosing and connecting is not the way. It is my way.
What about the backlash that influencers like yourself receive from posting anything that's positive about Judaism or Israel in this current global climate? What do you get? And what do you do with it?
I think the backlash is quite severe and quite harsh. And again, depending on your personality, that may affect you more or less. In my case, I reference back to how I grew up. I have a very tough skin. I'm, thank God, have a good, healthy dose of self-esteem. And I know when too much is too much. Too much time thinking about people that are very troubled and ill and choose to use their energy for evil. And I'm also very private about my locations and where I am and what I do. So, but the backlash is very harsh and very severe. And
For example, what are some of the things they
look,
are upset
after
about?
October 7th, I've got a lot of, I would do that to you over and over again. You can use your imagination of what that would look like.
And we're speaking as the week that the report came out after the special inquiry.
Every
and
awful,
rape.
horrible thing that happened to our men, women, and children in the kibbutz and Nova Festival. Also, I get a lot of memes, the quintessential, stereotypical Jewish nose and, very demeaning,
I'm
awful
sorry.
caricatures, things that I've seen at Yad Vashem in newspapers reminiscent of the 1930s in Eastern Europe. So all of that, in addition to also the zealots of our Jewish tribe trying to tell me that much of my exploitation on social media are grounds for divorce for my husband. So because I dance or because I show up too feminine, too sensual, even though I'm actually quite a modestly dressing person, I showed too much of this vessel that holds my soul. And so there are people that like to insert their opinions. Again, everyone's entitled to their opinions. Nobody's entitled to make up their own facts.
Lastly, you mentioned on this trip that you're or on your website also, that you're putting together your book. Would you like to give us a sneak peek?
Yeah, I mean, the book is really an understanding that when you meet somebody for the very first time, you are walking into a chapter of their life. And in my case, people met me for the very first time as the Challah Mom. And so they were walking into what I would call my chapter 7. And so I'm writing a book in which, in order to understand chapter 7, you have to reach chapters 1 through 6. And I will spend the first part of my book talking about my life, as much of what I've spoken about, but more in detail. And I will also speak to every single thing that happened to me after I made Aliyah and post October 7th. So we find ourselves in, once again, some uncharted territory, but in our response lies our power. And that's something that I'm working on. I've been working on really hard with this book.
It's been a privilege and an honor to actually speak to you in person after witnessing what you do in this room full of 200 women making challah. I hope mine comes out okay. I'm saving it for Shavuot. Thanks a lot for giving me this interview on the Canadian Jewish News North Star podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounded like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. You may also recognize Anat Ishai from our recent coverage of that documentary called Sheitel, exploring why Orthodox Jewish women cover their hair. She was one of the women featured. You can find links to her website, to her social media accounts, to her challah recipe, and our earlier Sheitel episode in today's show notes. North Star is produced by Zachary Kauffman and Izzie Helenchilde. Michael Fraiman's the executive producer, and Alicia Richler is the editorial director. We're off for Victoria Day Monday and back as usual on Wednesday. Thanks for listening.